Continuing with topic 4, paper 9, we'll look at section 3.2 on page 4.7. That is calculating the contracted value of HIBOR futures. Now, this often appears as a question and is very straightforward if you are aware of the formula. If not, you may find yourself doing some discounting of future values, which is not the approach. So it tells us the contracted value of a HIBOR futures contract is the quoted price, and that will be 100 minus the interest rate, multiplied by the value of minimum fluctuation, which is 125 Hong Kong dollars, multiplied by 100. That's it. We don't have to worry otherwise. Now, there are two contract sizes for HIBOR futures. The 1 month HIBOR future comes in a contract size of 15 million Hong Kong dollars, and the 3 month HIBOR futures, 5 million Hong Kong dollars. Now, you will be using these numbers in the exam, and often they are given in the question, but there's no harm in being aware of them and using them in practice questions. So let's look at an example. What is the cash settlement value of a HIBOR futures contract trading at 98? Now, 98 is the equivalent of 2% interest rate. And the solution is just following the formula. We take the 98 multiplied by $125 multiplied by 100, and that's it. So 1,225,000 Hong Kong dollars. And as I say often, you can be faced with a question in the paper 9 exam asking you to calculate the contract value of a HIBOR futures. So that small paragraph is well worth being aware of. Moving on to section 4, hedging using interest rate derivatives. Now, there is a relationship between yield and price, and also between the interest rate and the futures contract price, and the relationship is the same. It's an inverse relationship. So with a debt security, when the price rises, the yield falls. Conversely, when the price falls, the yield rises. And so it is with interest rates and the futures contract price. When interest rate rises, futures contract price falls, and you can see that from the pricing mechanism, 100 minus the interest rate. And when interest rate falls, the futures contract price rises. So there is also an inverse relationship between the interest rate and the interest rate futures contract price. And being aware of that can get you to answers very quickly. So when an investor buys an interest rate futures contract, you're buying bond portfolio exposure to a change in interest rate. Well, a rise in interest rate increases because the interest rate will go up and the futures price will come down. Conversely, when an investor sells interest rate futures, her bond portfolio exposure, change in interest rate decreases. Therefore, interest rate futures contracts can be used to change the duration of a bond portfolio. It's a detailed point that could come up in the exam, but not always. Okay, let's look at an example where we're hedging using HIBOR futures. Details for this example: in April, XD1, a fund manager, holds a broad portfolio of short-dated discount securities, average 90 days. We don't have to worry about the actual average days. Just detail given to us. Portfolio has a notional value of 800 million Hong Kong dollars, average investment yield of 3%. Now, the fund manager fears a rise in interest rates over the next 3 months, because if you're holding a debt portfolio, then an increase in the interest rate will bring down the prices of your debt securities, and so your investment falls. So do you buy or sell futures? Well, you're worried about a rise in interest rates. That means that the equivalent price of the future will fall. So if you believe that the price of the future will fall, you want to sell now and buy later. So when it says buy or sell futures, profit from the rise in the interest rates, then you want to sell futures. Which contract to sell? We're given the details, available contracts, April, May, June, and September, and we're told that it's average 90 days and that you're worried about a rise in interest rate over the next 3 months. So you want 3-month coverage. And as it says, given the fund manager's concerns over the next 3 months, most appropriate contract is June, because it's April now, April, May, June, 3 months. And we're told that that contract is trading at 97.4, the equivalent interest rate 2.6%. So how many contracts do you sell? Be aware of this. It can easily come up in the exam. And to calculate it, we divide notional value of the portfolio by the notional value of HIBOR futures contract. Now, the notional value of a 3-month HIBOR is 5 million. So we take the 800 million divided by the 5 million. That gives us 160 contracts. That's the number we must sell to set up the hedge. And we do that by implementing the hedge. We sell 160 at 97.4. To close the hedge, we're going to reverse the trade. We're told in late June, XT1 interest rate has risen. Average portfolio yield has risen to 3.2%, but the price has come down. HIBOR futures are now trading 96.7. Fund manager decides it's time to close the hedge, exits its future position, and in doing so will buy 160 3-month HIBOR futures at 96.7. Remember what we've done. We've sold high and bought low. Now, there will be a loss in the physical market, and the amount of that loss will depend on the portfolio duration. But we can calculate the profit in the futures market. The difference between the price we sold at 97.4, we bought at 96.7, so the gain is 0.7. Profit on each futures contract, remember the calculation of the cash value, 0.7 multiplied by $125 multiplied by 100 gives us 8,750. So the overall profit with regard to 160 contracts is 160 multiplied by 8,750, giving 1.4 million profit in the futures market, which will offset the loss in the physical market. And we show that in the table below, physical market versus the derivatives market. Now let's move on and look at hedging a future market position. So the details for this example in April XT1, corporate treasurer expects to have surplus funds of 800 million in 3 months' time. So the issue here is not holding debt securities, but is lending, is investing money with the intention of receiving interest. The funds will be used for a project in another 3 months. In other words, you're going to deposit that money in 3 months for a 3-month period. Accordingly, the treasurer wants to invest in a short-term instrument to enhance return, but is expecting short-term interest rates to fall. Now, if short-term interest rates are expected to fall, the futures price is going to increase. That's your expectation. And if a price is going to increase, you want to buy now and sell later. Treasurer wants to lock into the interest rate that will be earned. So, do you buy or sell futures? As I've just said, in this case, you would buy futures to set up the hedge. Which contract to buy? Again, your exposure is in 3 months' time, so you will want coverage for 3 months. It's now April, so you will go for the June contracts. How many contracts? And we're told the June contract is currently trading at 96.8. How many contracts to buy? Again, we divide the notional value by the HIBOR futures contract. 3 months, the notional value of the futures contract is 5 million. So we take 800 million divided by 5 gives us 160 contracts. To implement the hedge, we buy 160 3-month HIBOR futures at the original price, 96.8. Now, to close the hedge in late June XT1, we see that the interest rate's fallen. HIBOR futures are now trading at 97.2. So in late June XT1, the treasurer will close the hedge by reversing trade, and that involves selling 160 3-month HIBOR futures at 97.2. Interest rates gone down, the futures price has gone up. Remember, we bought low and sold high. So the difference in the price, 97.2 minus 96.8, gives us a 0.4 profit. The profit on each futures contract, 0.4 multiplied by the 125 Hong Kong dollar movement, and we then multiply by 100, giving a profit in each futures contract of 5,000 Hong Kong dollars. And so the overall profit will be 160 contracts multiplied by 5,000, giving a profit of 800,000 Hong Kong dollars. And again, in the table, we just outline the steps in the both the physical market and the derivatives market. Let us finish topic 4 by looking at 2 trading strategies using HIBOR futures. Sounds very grand, but it's very, very straightforward. To speculate on interest rates rising, if we think interest rates are going to rise, we think the futures price, inversely related, is going to fall. So we will sell when we think interest rates will rise. So we sell HIBOR futures now at the current price. Then we buy back the same number of futures contracts at the futures price when the reversing trade takes place, which we hope will be lower. If interest rates have risen, a profit will be made. If interest rates have fallen, a loss will be made. So it's one or the other. And the settlement value will be the change in the futures price multiplied by price per point, $125 multiplied by 100. And remember, for the total value, multiplied by the number of contracts. And to speculate on interest rates falling, it's the other way round. We think interest rates will fall, therefore we think the futures price will rise. If it's going to rise, we will buy now, buy low, and sell high. So we buy futures now at the current futures price. We sell the same number of futures contracts when the reversing trade takes place. Now, when the reversing trade takes place, what has happened to interest rates? Well, if the interest rates have fallen, a profit will be made because the futures price will have gone up. And if interest rates have risen, a loss will be made. And once again, the settlement value, change in the futures price multiplied by 125 Hong Kong dollars multiplied by 100 multiplied by the number of contracts. So you just have to remember the relationship between interest rates and the futures price, and that is that it is an inverse relationship. And when you're given details in a question of expectations of interest rates, you reverse that expectation with regard to the futures price, and then you decide, well, you don't decide, you realize that you must either sell high or buy low, and that will determine the strategy that you put forward. Okay, that's the end of topic 4 on interest rate derivatives. You will get a number of questions in the exam on this. The best way to prepare is practice questions, and as ever, I recommend you go to Examinator.online.